to be some kind of a caliphate, or you're not going to make Syria into a country like Afghanistan, because you know that there are people who say that maybe you want to behave like the Taliban.
There are many differences between Syria and the Taliban. The way we govern is different. Afghanistan is a tribal community. Syria is completely different. The people just don't think in the same way. The Syrian government and the ruling system will be in line with Syria's history and culture.
So the culture of Syria includes rights for women, it includes education for women, it includes tolerance for people drinking alcohol. Is that all acceptable to you?
When it comes to women's education, of course. We've had universities in Idlib for more than 8 years. I think the percentage of women in universities is more than 60%.
And alcohol?
There are many things I just don't have the right to talk about, because they are legal issues. There will be a Syrian committee of legal experts to write a constitution. They will decide, and any ruler or president will have to follow the law.
Let's talk about wider issues that you face. First of all, this country is broken. There is massive amount of destruction. The economy is destroyed. There are huge debts. How do you begin to start dealing with all of that when the country's under sanctions, and when major powers around the world and the United Nations say that you are the leader of a terrorist group?
That's a political classification. We haven't committed any crimes that justify calling us a terrorist group. In the last 14 years, we haven't targeted any civilians or civilian areas or civilian targets.
Okay, a lot of people will disagree with that. So look, this is what the map of Syria looked like on December 7th. So here we are about 2 weeks later. The Assad controlled that region. They came down, they came from the south to the north. They came from the north to the south. They met in Damascus. They've taken over that whole area. And so now they're just two little areas around the Russian bases in Latakia, the air base south of Latakia, and the naval base at Tartus. But Israel's kind of moved in. Israel has just absolutely destroyed, like I said, all of their weapons. Israel's taken over parts of the Golan Heights. You can see sort of a red line. That was a no man's land. If you've ever been up to the Golan Heights, you know that there was a narrow strip of land that the UN would occupy. Israel's moved beyond that into Syria a little ways. They took over the Syrian part of Mount Hermon. Here is Netanyahu. He did a talk up at I have the sound down. It's in Hebrew, so I turned the sound down. And he went up to the Golan this week. He said, I was up here, I think he said in the 73 war, 51 years ago, and it's good to come back. And we're not going to give this up until we feel secure. We have no intention to go further into Syria. But now you have the Druze villages that are up there in that area are saying, hey, we want to be part of Israel. And now the Druze are going to meet with Jolani. I think Jolani would like as many people to stay in Syria as he can because he'll need the tax revenues, especially because of other things. And so, all the magazines this week, what's going to happen? How are we going to handle this? Khomeini, he's involved. He gave a speech the other day. And when he gave the speech the other day, he seemed he didn't seem real upbeat. He seemed concerned about what things are going to happen. And they've lost all of their proxies. Now, this morning he was saying, well, we don't rely on proxies. If there's a war to be fought, we'll fight it. And that's not what the Iranians, the Iranians have always said, we will fight wars to the last dead Lebanese, or the last dead Syrian, or the last dead Hamas. They've never really gotten their people involved. And there's a lot of internal unrest. So Khomeini gave a number of speeches this week. If you really want to waste your time, I guess go listen to that. So this is what he said. I do not intend to analyze the situation in Syria. Others do the analysis, but today I intend to clarify and illustrate. By clarification, I mean conveying what has occurred and what perhaps is being deliberately concealed based on what we see and understand. By illustration, I mean to outline during today's remarks our own situation, our movement, the dynamics of the region, and the future of the region as we comprehend it. This is the essence and summary of the points I will present today. And so you'll see all these really bold jihadis. Boy, they sure sound very conventional when you get down to it. So as I said, he must have given 2 or 3 speeches. Now, and if you look at his website, clarification of today's situation, you'll see that, let me blow that up, why Iran isn't present in Syria now in 2024 and its government has collapsed. And he says, well, the weakness of the Syrian army, making the presence of our forces illogical. Why would we stay there if Assad's not going to fight for himself? And that's essentially what the Russians have said also. It's the duty of the army of that country itself to fight, abandoning thousands of organized young forces, negligence towards enemy and its plans, airspaces being closed and land routes being blocked, preventing aid, and the spirit of resistance and steadfastness is faltering in the Syrian government. So in other words, it's all Assad's fault. And, we'll come back when we went. Now, why was Iran present all those days? Well, we wanted to stop the spread of insecurity to Iran. And then they put up this to protect the sanctity of the holy sanctuaries in Iraq and Syria, because Shia holy places are very important to them. And so you can look at this a little bit later, and he goes on. He also put up this thing, what will be the future of the resistance front? First of all, he says, look, this is the U.S. and Israel. They're behind everything. We know that Israel controls everything. What will be the future of the resistance front? Liberation of seized territories of Syria, resistant front spreading to encompass the entire region, uprooting Zionism and Western elements in the region, and expulsion of U.S. from the region. And the U.S. does have, we might have gone from 1,000 to 2,000 troops there in the area of Syria and Iraq over the past couple of weeks. And they acknowledge it. And so I think it was a hard speech for him to give. He had to say, look, they really took it to us. Said, God willing, the Palestinian Hezbollah fighters will see the day when the malevolent Zionist enemy is trampled under their feet, but I will edit that to say, now he meant terrorists, Palestinian Hezbollah terrorists. And so the question is, everybody's talking about it, is it World War III? Are we in World War III? And I think we're in it. It's just that it hasn't gone completely hot. But there's a lot of people poking the Russian bear. Putin is upset. You'll see a little bit about what he has to say about the situation in just a moment. Their nuclear chief was killed by a exploding, one of those e-cycles that you can rent and leave anywhere in a pile. It exploded as he and his aide were coming out of their place in Moscow. And that's a big deal because, I mean, he was in charge of their nuclear defenses. And Putin's upset about it. And they're bombing Ukraine as much as they can. And Putin says, essentially he said we're going to take vengeance on them. So Russia has taken their weapons for the most part and moved them from Syria to Libya. Now, when we talk about these things of alliances in Ezekiel 38, Libya is put. Put is important in this Ezekiel 38 alliance. Now, I don't think we're on the verge of Ezekiel 38, but I'm just saying, as a lot of these alliances that are identified geographically are being put together. And so now Russia and Turkey have been sort of at odds in Libya, and now Russia's moving some of their arms and forces from Syria to Libya. Others are going back up to fight in Ukraine. And so you can kind of see, the Mediterranean, Ukraine and Russia is to the north of the map there. You can't see it on the map. And then you have Libya over here, and you see Libya is divided into a couple of different parts because they're in the midst of a civil war. Russia took their things, and there's some pretty stunning satellite pictures and images. This is the port at Tartus along the Mediterranean coast. And you can see everything being gathered there to be taken away. You also see some of the air bases. You see big cargo planes with their nose cones open, taking equipment away. And there's negotiations going on between Russia and the rebel forces. But Israel took advantage of it. This is a picture or a little video of a bombing attack on a weapons store near Tartus that Israel did. Look at this thing. This is taken from miles away, by the way. That's a very big boom. Now, some people suggested that it's nuclear. I don't think it's nuclear. Putin this week did his annual news conference. You've heard all these things, and I think they're propaganda. Putin's got cancer, he's ill, he can barely function. So he does it. If you think my updates are long, I'm no Putin. He did 4 hours and 45 minutes. And I fast forwarded through the thing. I did not see him take a drink of water or get up and take a bathroom break. And so for a guy who's 72, that's pretty amazing. Miri Eisen, in the interview I did with her this week, she said, of all the world leaders that I ever met, he physically scared me when I was in his presence. I was scared of him. So they also had this big map of Russia. And the interesting thing is over here in the east, in that red circle, those are Ukrainian territories. Those are part of Ukraine. But when he's doing this year-end summary, this is our land. So he already considers those territories to be part of Russia. The Crimean Peninsula, the eastern provinces of Ukraine, they consider them to be. So one of the things he did in his...
So we begin.
This is the intro to this big 4 hour and 45 minute news conference he did. And by the way, some people asked him some pretty difficult questions. So, I mean, it was big production, high definition cameras, many gigabytes of information. So one of the things they asked him about is, what about Syria? Now, this is going to be a translation, so it's a little choppy, but I thought I would just play it for you, at least a little bit. Who benefits from the situation in Syria? And it's kind of interesting as the answer.
Thank you. Please have a seat. We are in constant touch with President Erdogan. Well, I cannot remember the exact date when we talked last time, but we definitely also talked the situation in the region, in the Middle East, and the attitude of President Erdogan and Turkey to the Middle East developments is well known, and our position on Lebanon and Palestine also.
So I'll summarize for it, since I don't want to waste time. He said, we believe in a two-state solution, that there has to be, that's what the UN wants, that's what we want, so we think there should be a Palestinian state. He also said, though, looking at it objectively, the country that benefits the most from the situation in Syria right now is Israel. And I think it's a pretty objective analysis. Hezbollah's lost its supply lines. Israel's taken out a lot of Hezbollah. I'll talk about that in just a moment. Iran is withdrawn, Russia's withdrawn, and the rebels are indicating they may just be practical. We're not going to go against Israel because they would obliterate us, because we don't have an air force anymore. Israel has an air force, air defenses, and that sort of thing. So we're not going to take them on. But Israel objectively benefits the most. So we're looking at the situation. But he also mentioned that there's a lot of discussion going on between him and Erdogan in Turkey. And I suspect that there are secret agreements that Russia and Turkey have entered into about what happens if Assad falls. What are we going to do? How are we going to handle the situation? And how are we going to act with regard to each other? But I don't know. Nobody knows what those are because they're secret. Foreign Affairs has a big article, Putin's Point of No Return, how an unchecked Russia will challenge the West. And Russia's still a powerful military. They don't have a huge economy. They're having some economic problems, and they're stuck, they're bogged down in Ukraine. As I've said, I think eventually they win. I don't know how that will be negotiated. And in the press conference, he even talked about having discussions with President Trump. And it's kind of an interesting thing because Trump doesn't get sworn in for another 4 weeks, but everybody's acting like he's the president in many respects because there's no one there right now. That's the honest truth. This is from the Wall Street Journal that, Russia's going after some of their Soviet era stockpiles to fight the war in Ukraine. They've lost 8,000 tanks in Ukraine. And it takes a while to manufacture all that stuff. And so, the more missiles they use there, they can't use missiles elsewhere. Now, Russia has some pretty powerful stuff. And you wonder, though, how much of it's real and how much of it is hype. And the answer is you don't know that until they use it. And if you've guessed wrong, you're in big, big trouble. So it's not something that everybody should just take lightly. For example, one of the things that appears that the rebels were able to take over is this Podlet K-1, the sophisticated radar system that works with the S-300 and S-400 air defenses. But the Syrians didn't like, at least the rebels didn't like the Russians, as the Russians are withdrawing their military equipment, taking it over to the ports and the air base to get out of Syria. Here are the Syrian rebels, and what do you see them doing? They're throwing their shoes at the Russian military. Now, in the Middle East, that's a very, very big insult. You remember when the guy in the press conference, George Bush 43 was doing in Iraq, and he took off his shoe and threw it at the president? That just wasn't throwing your shoe at the president. That was a complete, utter sign of disrespect. And so you see them doing this with the Russian military. Assad has moved on to Russia. There's a lot of controversy about how he got out and that type of thing. It appears that Russia told him you need to get out. They got him out through the bases, but he may have gone with his family still in Syria. They later got out. His brother's there. His wife is there. He took a couple $2 billion with him to Russia. So if he's living in exile in Russia, he can have a pretty good lifestyle. The word is that his wife has filed for divorce. She wants to get it while the cash is still there, I guess, and everything. So here's Christiane Amanpour, and I don't remember what, she's interviewing a professor or geopolitical expert about Gaza Strip. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But I just play a little bit of this as much as you can stand. I really cannot stomach this woman. She's Lebanese, by the way.
So we spoke to you, I spoke to you early on in this war when the word genocide was beginning to bubble up. And you had a clear, description then that it had not yet reached that level. I'm going to ask you again later in the interview, but I want to first ask you, what did you find this trip in Israel? Because it was a while since you'd been there, and I wonder how the war is beginning to percolate and be taken, be sort of absorbed by people there.
Yeah, so I went to Israel for the first time after the war broke out in June, and now I went again. I just came back this morning. And I would say that the difference is that when I was there in June, there was huge reluctance to even have Gaza mentioned. Everything that was going on in Gaza, people, when you spoke with them, their eyes sort of glazed over and they wanted to change the topic. And now I think there is more awareness of the tremendous devastation that has gone on there. But it does not seem, apart from in some very limited groups, it does not seem to have any effect on how people actually respond to that. So the knowledge has, as you said, has percolated. There have been many reports.
So he's a professor of Holocaust and genocide studies at Brown University. So look, this is an indication. I listened to this guy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't like Israel. He doesn't like Jews. And it should tell you that if you're paying to send your kids to Brown University, you should ask for a refund and get out. You'll probably get a better education at a local community college than you will at Brown University. They're woke and everything. So this week, the D8 met in Egypt. These were a bunch of guys that came together. Erdogan, there's a guy to Erdogan's right, your left, from Malaysia. You have El-Sisi from Egypt. You have Abbas. You have the Iranian foreign minister. The Iranian president was also there. Investing in youth and supporting SMEs, shaping tomorrow's economy. 11th summit of the Organization of the Developing 8 Countries, the D8, that's where they get the D8 from, for economic cooperation. And by the way, the guy at Malaysia, he got up to do a speech, and I wasn't able to pull the video clip out in time for today. He gets up and he's really a big supporter of Palestine, the Palestinian narrative, the Palestinian state. So he gets up to speak, and as he's speaking, Erdogan gets up and his whole delegation gets up and walks out of the room. Now, I'm not sure why that was. It was just sort of it's clearly a diplomatic slam against this guy. And Malaysia's been very anti-Israel for a long time. Remember, they used to have that older guy who was like in his 90s. He was still the president or prime minister, and he was a virulent anti-Semite. So Erdogan gave a speech. Of course, they always have these great big tables and everything. And so this is part of what Erdogan had to say. Important events are taking place in our region and the world. And you need to listen to Erdogan. Look, we can argue about who's all involved in these end-time alliances. One that's not, Persia and Turkey are unmistakably there. So the leader of Turkey, if he's changing, I had a conversation with Chuck Missler 16 years ago, and I said, what do I look for in end times Bible prophecy? And he said, watch Turkey. I remember that very, very well, sitting there at dinner. It was me and Chuck and Bill Koenig. And so I've watched Turkey ever since. So Erdogan said this in Egypt, in Cairo. The Syrian people need unity, solidarity, compromise, and the rapid recovery of their war-torn country. As their neighbors and brothers, we are trying to contribute to ensuring stability in Syria during this difficult period. So the other thing you need to do is you almost need like an interpreter to say, what is Erdogan really saying? And it's like, I was behind it all. I'm going to get it worked out. Just listen to what I have to say. But in the meantime, I'm going to put on this facade that, oh, wow, this happened in Syria. We can't really believe this. Our most sincere expectation is to build a Syria free of terrorism, where all religious, sectarian, and ethnic groups live side by side in peace. Right. So he met with everybody. Here he is with El-Sisi. And then one of the things he said was this: we see Israel's steps that disregard Syria's territory integrity, including the expansion of its illegal settlements in the Golan Heights. Now, the interesting thing about that, if you go back to this map, in the north of Syria, the yellow areas are Kurdish areas, but so these yellow areas are Kurdish areas, but you see this kind of grayish area here in the north and another one over here. That's controlled by Turkey, and Turkey's always wanted to expand their things down. They wanted to expand their borders down into Syria because they have this plan. And I think you're seeing that plan starting to come to fruition. This is from the Times, UK Times, London Times. Erdogan is the victor in the Middle East chaos. So some people, Putin says it's Israel. A lot of other commentators say this is clearly a Turkish operation. Now, I want to go back 4 years and show you what Erdogan put on his Twitter feed. This is from the presidency of the Republic of Turkey. We consider it honor on behalf of our country and nation to express the rights of the oppressed Palestinian people on every platform with whom we have lived for centuries. Although, if somebody's talking about them at the conference that I'm at, I'm going to get up and leave the room. But he put this up back in 2020, 4 years ago. Jerusalem is our city. And then this was in the Jerusalem Post saying that we paved the way. Turkey negotiated the fall of Assad with Russia, Iran, Turkish foreign minister said in an interview, which is kind of interesting. So Richard Kemp writing over at the Telegraph, Turkey is seeking domination of Syria. Why does Israel get the blame? Everybody wants to blame Israel. And the anti-Israel people will say something like, look, nobody's attacking Israel. They must be behind it all. They must have funded these jihadis. They're the ones who did this because nobody's attacking them. Well, there's a practical reason for that. If they attacked Israel directly, they would get obliterated. Look at what's happened over the last few months. So here's this interview at NT.
Fırsat bilip toprak kazanmaya mı çalışıyor? Nedir İsrail'in amacı?
İsrail yani Ruslar ve İranlılarla görüşmelerimiz işte o hafta o bir hafta bunun özeti. Onlar artık anladılar. Yani bizlerle İran Dışişleri Bakanı geldi sonra Doha'da hem Ruslarla hem İranlarla bir araya geldik.
Well, anyway, so he's saying in this interview on Turkish television, we talked with the Russians, we talked with the Iranians, we worked it all out. We were all part of a plan. And this is the map that Turkey's been using for a long time. And you see how Syria keeps getting covered over by more red. That's Erdogan's plan. That's what he's trying to do. Wall Street Journal the other day, collision between Turkey and Israel looms. And it's true. Something's going to happen, and I'm going to show you a clip from Erdogan's speech yesterday, maybe Friday, at AKP, that's his party meeting. He gave Putin's doing 4.5 hour press conferences, Erdogan's speaking an hour, 35 minutes to an hour every day or twice a day. And so there is a big battle coming between Israel and Turkey. We know this from Bible prophecy, and it appears that geopolitics is putting this out. And then the Financial Times, Netanyahu and Erdogan are vying for the strongman title. And it's kind of an interesting thing there, you know, that you see the map there and they're fighting over Syria. Great graphic in the Financial Times yesterday. So, hang on a second. I'm going to do something here. See if I can get rid of that. Okay. Oh, this is drones in the UK. So I want you to go back. Remember, he said Jerusalem is our city in a tweet 4 years ago. Remember in 2017 when Trump said, I'm moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. He had the big organization of Islamic countries, you know, the 57 countries. They came to Istanbul. They all gave speeches. And in Yeni Sefek, one of Erdogan's mouthpieces, I've used this graphic a lot. You know, we always talk about Ezekiel 38, 39. I'm like, well, nobody really believes that that's going to happen in our day and age, right? Well, Erdogan does. I mean, this is the graphic his mouthpiece paper put up. And what do you see? You see a sea of green Islamic countries attacking Israel. Seems like you ought to believe what he says. So then he also gave a speech. This is on Friday. Oh, this was kind of interesting. Erdogan, Turkey is greater than Turkey itself. As a nation, we cannot limit our vision to 782,000 square kilometers. Then who asked, what is Turkey doing in Libya, Syria, or Somalia? May fail to comprehend this vision. In other words, if you don't understand, you're not paying attention. Turkey's moving in all these other countries. And Turkey, by the way, is concerned that there's a big move into Africa by Russia. Russia doesn't like Turkey, and Turkey doesn't like Russia because they're all moving into Africa to try to control the mineral and oil wealth there. But then he gave this speech Friday, and as he's speaking, a bunch of people in the crowd, they call him Chief sometimes. So this is from, I don't know where this guy's from. I think he's from Colombia or someplace. In Mardin, Turkey, President Erdogan addressed a crowd of young people, and the young people were shouting, Mr. President, or Chief, take us to Jerusalem. And he replied, patience brings victory, or victory will belong to the patient. Now, do you get some idea of the designs of Erdogan in that? And remember, when he puts up the post 4 years ago, that Jerusalem is our city, where did that thing go? Well, it was the Dome of the Rock was there. It must have got oh, there it is. You see that tweet or that poster that he put up from his presidency website? What's that? This Dome of the Rock. It's about Jerusalem. That's prophetic. Jerusalem will be a cup of trembling. All the nations will gather against Jerusalem. Now, they're not there yet, but people are preparing people's minds for that. And then Richard Kemp, good article, the mullahs could fall. If they do, Turkey rises. And I talked a little bit about that. My view of the Daniel chapter 8 might be a conflict between Turkey and Persia. Now, if they do it the way Turkey, the Ottoman Empire used to do it, they'll let Persians run their own business, but they'll still be subservient. It's very much like the Roman Empire. Now, we had this attack in Germany at the Christmas market. Yesterday, last I heard, there were 11 people dead, 200 injured, as this Saudi doctor who had immigrated to Germany while he was facing maybe murder charges in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia has tried to extradite him back to Saudi Arabia for trial, and the German government says, well, you'll put him to death if he's convicted. So we're civilized people. We can't let him go back to Saudi Arabia and stand trial because he might be put to death, but we'll let him drive his car through a Christmas market and kill 11 innocent people on a festive occasion. And I'm telling you, the propaganda on this is just absolutely unbelievable. But it's interesting the way that some of the mainstream media, so this is Daily Mail, car drives into Christmas market in German city. I guess it was an AI-driven car. You know, it was one of those Tesla, Uber things. At least 2 dead and 60 injured after car plows into German Christmas market. And so the narrative is, well, it's the car that did it. Now, Jerusalem Post, I think this is the one on the right, got it right. Car ramming kills at least 2, because in Israel, they know about car rammings. They happen all the time. I've walked through places where there have been car rammings. And Pam, if you remember, when we were coming out of Nablus with Joel Kramer, the guys, we were at a checkpoint, and Joel was up sort of negotiating our ability to get through the checkpoint, and the Palestinian guys there all came up and said, hey, why don't you just get behind the wheel of the car and ram those IDF soldiers? So they were following the Iranian model. Okay, they're going to have their terrorism done by the last dead American that we happen to see. So car plows versus car ramming. Jerusalem Post got it right. And then what you've seen, though, all across Germany, and they have a lot of Christmas markets in Europe and Eastern Europe like this, And these are Islamists that are just marching down the street through these Christmas markets. And what are they doing? They're showing we're in charge. Now, some people say, why don't you go back to Syria? That's where you came from, by and large. But they don't want to go back to Syria because they know what awaits them is not good. So this car ramming attack by this guy, and so you're seeing a lot of politics get overlaid on top of this. So there was a very good explanation I found on Twitter by a lady who knows. She said he's clearly, he's not a Sunni, he's a Shia terrorist, he's lying to you, he's masquerading who he really is. And then others saying, he's Jewish. He must be Jewish funded, and he's a Christian. And then all these guys are wetting their pants in the UK and Europe about, we can't be too difficult on him because, we might offend somebody. So we really can't talk about what the real issue is. And the German government is in the process of failing. So I'll talk about this real quickly. The Houthis launched some missiles. You see the red alerts from, I think it was Friday night or early Saturday morning across Israel around Tel Aviv. And here's a video of some of the things that happened. These are the missiles coming in. You'll see Iron Dome or Arrow missiles take out some of them, but then there was one missile. You'll see it here. Boom. It came in very, very quickly. And there you go, you see it. So somebody was saying, was it a hypersonic missile? And the answer is, I don't know. I think Israel will be better prepared the next time. They seem to learn from these things. So I think some people got hurt, but nobody got killed, and it hit near a school there in Tel Aviv, Yafo. So here's this great, I don't have time to go into this. This is in Tablet Magazine, an article by David Samuels. If I remember when I do it when I get home, I'll put a link in the show notes to the article at Tablet Mag. Rapid onset political enlightenment. And what it does is this completely dismantles everything that Barack Obama has done to cause the situation in the Middle East and how he's left everybody very much unprepared, and he can't leave soon enough. So let's hope that he goes away. He was the only president that we've had, other than Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who stayed in Washington. No, wait, it wasn't Roosevelt. Might have been Teddy Roosevelt. Barack Obama was only the second president who stayed in Washington, D.C. after his term of office was over. Now, why was he doing that? You can do the math on that. This came out of Israel Hayom newspaper. Says this: Jared Kushner reveals Trump's vision. This was just published in Israel Hayom on Friday or yesterday or today. 10 countries will join the Abraham Accords after Saudi Arabia. 10 countries ought to kind of ring some bells with you. In a comprehensive interview, Trump's former senior advisor reveals that Pakistan and Indonesia are among the countries expected to join the peace agreements. I told the Biden administration that an agreement with Saudi Arabia could be reached within 3 to 6 months. So, interesting comments by Jared Kushner. Let's see. So Netanyahu gave an interview in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, the inside story of Israel's comeback victory, and I've juxtaposed it with this article from Ynet that was earlier this year, back in February. And this is kind of interesting because, I've interviewed security experts in the Middle East now for a while. When this whole thing started, this was comes from a magazine. This is what they expected to get from Hezbollah: 3,000 rockets a day for 3 weeks. The collapse of the missile defense system, bombed Air Force bases, disabled power plants and water facilities, occupied settlements, mass killings, and civil chaos in the central cities. That's what almost all the security experts were saying, that this was going to happen. Hezbollah was going to do that. It was very capable. It was Iran's most capable proxy. in terms of supplies and numbers and preparation. They've been preparing this for 40 years, by and large. And so there was a release, the Institute on Counterterrorism at Reichman University, and about 100 experts contributed to it. A comprehensive report revealed for the first time outlines in chilling detail what will happen on the home front and at the front in the campaign against Hezbollah. They called it the scenario. And so they had a lot of graphics there, and they talked about the deadliest war of all, incessant missile fire, the north is under attack, Iron Dome collapses, infrastructure-oriented cyber attacks, without electricity, water in Ben Gurion Airport, missiles for Air Force bases, missiles will be landing on Air Force bases. And so that we've had this collapse of the Syrian project. That's my Photoshop deal on the chess piece for Syria. Then, of course, you got the Hezbollah with the turban on fire. I thought that was I shouldn't have to beg for praise, my wife's going, oh, brother. And then, of course, my Hamas with the Palestinian kafir on it. So it's Israel's advance. Abbas was meeting with the International Court of Justice. The government in Canada may be falling apart. They may be headed to elections. David Weinberg has a great article Friday at the Jerusalem Post about what's going on in Canada. And we have friends up there, and the anti-Semitism up there is off the charts. I mean, doctors are leaving places in Ontario because the anti-Semitism is Jewish doctors. Jewish patients don't want to go to non-Jewish doctors because they don't think they're getting treated right or listened to because they're Jewish. It's a big problem. And anti-Semitism is rising. So I'm going to play, I put up a thing, Mark Sutherland, a week ago on Mark's YouTube channel or Rumble channel, YouTube channel. And we said that we thought Candace Owens was an anti-Semite. So I'm going to play a few minutes of a couple clips of hers. I want you decide. Because I had people say, I don't see anything that she says that's anti-Semitic. And I'm like, really? Listen to this. This is Candace on Piers Morgan.
So I actually didn't watch that interview, so I haven't seen it in its full context, and I try never to weigh in on clips because there'll be something I'm missing, and then everybody screams at me. But what I will say is this. The larger discussion that's happening right now is whether or not having survived a Holocaust gives you the permission to commit a Holocaust. And for whatever reason, people have been, what I would say, milking the Holocaust narrative in the same way that Black Americans were milking the slavery narrative and essentially saying, like, we lived through this and we survived this. And so now nobody can say that anything we do is wrong. And that's the big issue today, is that we have so many people that will not recognize that it is totally feasible that a Jewish person, and I'm speaking here about Bibi Netanyahu, could do something as horrific as what was done to the Jews throughout World War II or throughout history.
But is that an accurate comparison? I'll tell you why I say that. As we know, I mean, whatever Dan Bilzerian wants people to believe, 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. Another 6 million people were murdered by Hitler and the Nazis. The numbers of people being killed in Gaza are, in my view, have gone way beyond what is acceptable as a response to October the 7th. However, you're still talking about, at the moment, a death toll of under 50,000. There's no comparison in the amount of dead people compared to the Holocaust. So do you understand why?
But it is a Holocaust, what's happening.
Well, is it though?
Yes.
So, I think language is really important.
I think language is really important as well, and that's
people
why
say Holocaust, genocide,
I think what's happening is a Holocaust. The burning bodies of the children that I'm seeing every day, and we spoke about this a little bit on my show, but I have recognized that the ability to see this stuff every day has transformed my opinion. Maybe the numbers wouldn't have gotten so high if people had spoken up when it was happening at the very beginning during World War II. And so I want to use my platform to say that I believe that they are intentionally executing a Holocaust. I think Bibi Netanyahu, there's tons of evidence, and obviously the Western media is not reporting on this, but the corruption trials that are going on with Bibi Netanyahu pertaining to October 7th and him editing the transcripts and the prior knowledge that he knew is now becoming extremely pertinent. It is a question as to whether or not he allowed the attacks to take place, essentially to then be able to go in and to commit this Holocaust against the Palestinians. Now, based on everything that I've looked into and stuff that I had not seen before, because the Western media doesn't cover it, Bibi Netanyahu caught off camera speaking about how he had no...
Okay, I have to stop that. She does not know what she's talking about. She is a narcissistic ignoramus. You can quote me. And she's anti-Semitic. She makes this thing, well, you know, if you were part of the Holocaust, you're not allowed to go commit a Holocaust. It's not a Holocaust. It's not a genocide. And by the way, Bibi Netanyahu is on trial right now. When I was in Israel 2 years ago, he was facing certain charges. I asked then, how long are these charges, which predate 2002 by many, many years, how long are these trials going to go on? 5 or 6 more years. Now, there are suggestions like, well, if he would just resign and leave, we would pardon him for that if he agreed to leave and never seek public office again. And that's his decision. Okay? There's a lot of pressure for him to do that. But what happened on October 7th is not part of those charges or that trial. When she says that, she's either lying or totally ignorant. And I would suggest she's both. You cannot hold yourself out as a valid commentator and say Bibi Netanyahu's on trial right now for what happened for ignoring the warnings on October 7th. That is a complete fabrication. You have to have lost your ability to reason to believe that. And I don't understand why Piers Morgan let her get away with it. Is it a genocide? It's not a genocide. Here are the statistics. In the Hamas war, 13% of the deaths are civilian. In most wars, it's 90%. By the way, I looked up, this is CIA fact book, and you can always say, well, it's the CIA. But listen, Gaza Strip in 2023 estimated to have 3 deaths per 1,000 population. Does that sound like a genocide to you? In 2024 estimate, it's gone down to 2.9. Well, that must be awful compared to the rest of the world. There are 235 countries or political entities on the CIA fact book death rate list. I looked it up. Gaza is 232 out of 235. Now, wait a minute. That doesn't sound like Israel's death rate is 5 times that amount. They're in the top 40 in the world. Now I'll say, well, they're not counting all this baloney. You're claiming it's a genocide. You have the burden of proof. Where are you getting your information, Candace? Population growth rate 2024 estimate, 2.02% increase. That's IDF, you're the worst genociders in history if that's what you're doing. And you're not committing genocide. It's a complete fabrication. Oh, comparison ranking there, 225 out of 232, I think is the number on the list. I apologize for being a little bit inaccurate. So I want you to listen about where does she get this nonsense? There you go.
What should have been Israel's response to that, given the scale of it?
Well, first and foremost, there had to be a response. And we know that the IDF is very capable of a surgical tactical response because they've done it over the years plenty of times in which they're able to take out terrorists. We just watched them execute a beeper attack and hit out Hamas terrorists. So this
Which I think is a very relevant point, because if they could do that to 3,000 Hezbollah terrorists, why couldn't they be as precise with Hamas?
Because they don't want to be. They want to level it because they want to take it over. And I believe, and you can see this, by the way, in the videos of the settlers dancing. I mean, why do they have settlers already ready? Doesn't that seem strange that this quickly you already have settlers that are going in and taking over the territory, and you're hanging, children's toys?
Well, what should Israel have done, though? What would have been?
They should have just taken out the Hamas terrorists.
How do you do that when they're embedded amongst civilians?
Listen, I'm not an IDF minister, but what I can say...
You're not an expert or anything. By the way, this is a video, and you could say, boy, they really destroyed Gaza. Look at these videos. It's horrible, the destruction. And if this is what's happening, this does look like, to somebody like Candace, this looks like Israel's committing genocide. Look at the block after block after block. By the way, this is not Gaza. This is Damascus, Syria. This is what was done by Russia and Syria to the Sunni people, and this is the Yarmouk Palestinian refugee camp within the city limits of Damascus. Used to have 180,000 people live there. It was one of the more densely populated places on the planet. By the way, how long do you think, we should get a pool going. How many days do you think it will be before Candace looks at this video and complains about the genocide in Syria? Nobody would take that bet because she's never going to say it because it doesn't involve Jews. And you people who yelled at me this week saying, she's not an anti-Semite, she's a good conservative Christian woman. Baloney. Baloney. She converted to Roman Catholicism, and the whole first hour I talked about what has been done to pervert the story of Jesus in Bethlehem. Go watch it. You want to listen to somebody who knows genocide? Here's a couple minutes of Natasha Hausdorff.
In the context of discussing genocide, I perfectly understand my role here as the lawyer to set out, the legal definition and talk a little bit about how this term is being abused with respect to Israel, what the possible ramifications are for that, and also to look at a little bit more detail at the allegations that South Africa has been advancing at the International Court of Justice. So in terms of the definition of this term, this is the only bit I'm going to read out to you, and it's from Article 2, essentially, of the Genocide Convention. So the 1948 Convention on the Punishment and Prevention of the Crime of Genocide defines the concept of this crime, and it does so critically by focusing the key aspect of this crime is intention. The intention to destroy a group in whole or in part, and this is a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. That is the characterizing element of this crime, the intention to destroy a group in whole or in part. And then there are a number of acts that are listed according to this definition, which include killing or causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. That's the legal definition.
What did I just show you? Increasing birth rate, increasing population, completely contrary to the definition of genocide, Candace Owens. You do not know what you are talking about. And she is, and I will say, I said this to somebody, and I like people, I really do. But sometimes you got to speak the truth in love. And I said, if you can't see what Candace Owens is about, you need to reset your discernment meter. And I stand by that. That's not a cruel statement. That's an honest statement of what you need. And what's going on with people on the right, like Candace Owens, who's doing this? What's going on? Now, Trevor Loudon, referred you to his thing at the Rare Foundation, RAIR Foundation, about 4 or 5 months ago. And he said that he believes it's a communist Russian propaganda plot to turn the right-wing people into pro-Russian anti-Semites. And you know what? I think he's right. Dumasani Washington, who I interviewed before about Tucker Carlson's interview of Munther Isaac, the guy I referred to in the first hour, he notes it too. And Dumasani, great guy, pastor down in Charlotte area, pro-Israel. And he wrote an article at Tablet Magazine when Tucker interviewed Munther Isaac, and he called it, he and his co-author, they called it The Arsonist. Tucker Carlson burns down the bridges between Christians and Jews. And he was 100% correct. Do not fall for Tucker's shtick. He is misleading you. It's unbelievable. And I'm troubled that people cannot see it by the way he conducts his interviews. He fawns all over Putin, lets Putin spout Russian narrative propaganda history that's not accurate. never challenges him. And as soon as that singer, what's his name, John Rich, says, well, the Scofield Bible was written by Zionists. That's not true. But Tucker leaps right on that. You need to understand where he is coming from. And look, 90% probably of what he stands for, I would agree with. On this, no. He's wrong. Here's what Dumisani Washington says. Correct. From Louis Farrakhan. By the way, Farrakhan died today. 91 years old. Good riddance. From Louis Farrakhan to Candace Owens to Tucker Carlson to Glenn Greenwald to Cornel West. Now, wait a minute. Some of those are left-wingers. Yeah, it's a horseshoe, folks. Far right and far left get very close together, and they're almost indistinguishable at some point. They are providing cover for the Islamist slaughter, enslavement, and displacement of millions of Africans and others as they lie to you about Israel. Based on this artist in Los Angeles who had said, honestly, I think this whole publicity campaign against Jews in Israel is just a smokescreen to distract from heinous colonization Muslims are conducting deep into Africa with the most horrible cruelty to Africans. 100% correct. Who did Tucker interview this week? I'm going to go about another 10 minutes. So, by the way, listen on 2 times speed. You can get through this a lot quicker. And believe me, I've got 2 things I've got to do yet. Here is Tucker interviewing Jeffrey Sachs, a professor, a left-wing communist, China-funded, Soros-funded, left-wing, Jew-hating nut job. And they're talking about Syria and Israel. It's a long interview. Millions of views, like 2 million views. I want you to listen to just a little bit of this. This was put up on Tuesday or Wednesday.
What I didn't understand and still don't understand is why we're all required to hate Assad. I'm not speaking for myself. I don't have strong feelings about Assad one way or the other. Apparently he's protected the Christians, so I'm grateful for that as a Christian. But why am I required to hate Assad? Tulsi Gabbard went and met with Assad. She's been attacked ever since. Has anyone ever explained why Americans should hate Assad?
Because every regime change operation we ever do, we have to make sure that the opponent is the worst villain since Hitler or Hitler reincarnate.
Some ophthalmologist from London is a bloodthirsty dictator. I didn't really.
We have to say this, and this is part of the psyops or the info war that goes along with regime change operations. This is completely typical. And we're told if we don't stop him now, it's only going to spread, and
he'll be in Des Moines.
Exactly.
Okay. So that was like Tuesday or Wednesday. Why should I not like Assad? I just don't understand it. Well, here's a clue for you, Tucker. You're the great journalist, right? Read the stinking news. It's all over the place. And so this comes out the day after, starts coming out the day after Tucker says this nonsense. Why Assad was a good guy, I just don't understand it. Jeffrey Sachs, oh yeah, we did the regime change. And then we just turn around and call people Hitler. No, Candace Owens calls Bibi Netanyahu Hitler. Get your facts straight, Dr. Sachs. I think he's an Ivy League guy too. I'm sorry, these are not good advertisements for an Ivy League degree, which I don't have, by the way. The drug factory that helped fuel Assad's tyranny. They are finding mountains of cash and drugs that Assad's regime manufactured. Billions of, bringing in cash flow of $5 or $6 billion a year in cash, selling a hyperactive drug called Captagon. It's like crystal meth on steroids. And so you would sell it to jihadists because it makes them, they can go for days when they're high on this stuff. It's very addictive. And the Assad regime made billions and billions of dollars, a lot of which ended up in Assad's pockets, while he was protected and funded by Russia and Iran. Do the math, folks. That's not a psyop. That's a fact. Why should we hate them? This is from Channel 4 in the UK. It was like the day after Tucker's interview with Jeffrey Sachs. Look at this.
Was the regime's first choice when it came to burying the revolution.
طلق ناري ومطمش عيونه واحيانا بالزلط يعني عاري.
Around half the city made up of Assad soldiers and their families, so it afforded the regime near complete silence from the rest of the population about what happened here,
Syria,
until now. Others have reported remotely on the existence of the biggest mass grave in the 21st century using satellite imagery. So we had that and GPS coordinates. 2012.
حفروا هونيك بالتركس حفروهم بالتركس صار يجيبوهم من الباب هون ينزلوهم.
Would bring them to the door, take them out and bury them here. Who? People that Assad's henchmen had killed. Women and children. The prisons they're finding are full of rape rooms, acid vats to dissolve bodies, and bone and presses to crush bodies to dust. This is where they were buried. This one graveyard, if you watch it, so go to Channel 4 News, you can find it on YouTube very easily, and watch the whole thing. They're estimating in this one graveyard, 150 to 250,000 people are buried.
This was the first plot between two headstones. Within that year, half the cemetery became an unmarked grave.
From here to over there. Film it.
يعني هاي الطول
20 meters long.
جابوا تركس
They
حفروها.
brought diggers in to dig the ground, then they brought the corpses.
بعدين ردموه.
A while after they covered the bodies, the smell would emerge.
سلتت التربة.
And the laborers would have to come back to cover the graves so the smell fades.
So this site was sort of ground zero when it comes to the mass graves all around here. So let's start here. How many people do you think are buried underneath this patch of ground?
طبعا نحن يعني بتتوقع على حسب عداد المرات اللي جابوا فيها كم نقله جابوا يعني جابوا برادين 3 10 20 اذا كل مثلا 10 برادات كل براد فيها 20 30
600 to 900 bodies at a time.
توقع بس ممنوع تشوف نحن وقت اللي جابوهم
Back at the mayor's office, we meet Mahmoud al-Sabah.
You were not allowed to say your name.
He was the driver for a more senior local official.
In Assad's prison, you were not allowed to say your name. So now people who've been in these prisons for 25, 30 years, who are you? I don't know. I don't remember. I think I might have been from here.
Explained that initially the bodies were buried at a depth of 1 meter, but animals scavenged the site. After that, the pits had to be made deeper.
بعدين صاروا يسووه على 3 امتار شلون يحطوه؟ لا مثلا يعني ما عاد تبين جثث.
There are reports that the number of people buried here is much higher than 150,000. But either way, that is a sizable proportion of the entire number of Syrian people disappeared under Assad's regime. And I simply don't know what else to say, really, about this place.
I think they go on to interview somebody whose uncle disappeared. We never found him.
Here is the true size of this mass grave.
Okay, so Tucker.
And here is
this
exactly
is why you don't
what
like
these men
Assad.
saw here, in their own words for the first time. Hard to hear, but needs saying.
أنا شفت مرة سيدة واحدة لابسة بيجامة رياضة قالوا عنها لعبة جمباز.
They said she was a gymnast. She was Syrian.
دفنوها لأنه لفتت نظري إنه عم
They buried her here. I noticed she was still in her gym clothes.
طلب الأطفئية من الطائفة الجثث من كتر ما متجمدة صايرة هيك
They called the fire brigade because over 100 bodies were frozen together. They tried to pull the bodies apart, but they couldn't. The fire brigade thawed out the bodies until the ice melted. Then they were able to pull the bodies apart in order to bury them. No notification of next of kin or anything. This guy, he comes and he's like my uncle. But I live with the hope that maybe he wasn't part of this, but I know he was. But I have to live with this little teeny tiny percent of a percent that maybe he was not.
How do you take DNA samples for the many families still looking for their loved ones, even mine? And my uncle could be underneath my feet right now. My friends could be, and so many others.
A few years ago, the regime moved some bodies from here after Moaz's work and others exposed what was happening. Mass graves don't distinguish between people, that's the point. But this is not one big canvas, one single image. It literally belies the sanctity and individuality of every person buried here. And for their loved ones, this is holy ground.
Parker Brian, with that special.
So, I mean, the stories that are coming out are just horrific. And I don't understand, well, I understand what's going on. Jesus told us in Matthew 24 to beware of deception in the last days. And we're seeing it come at us from all sides, and we need to be aware of it. You are, mind you, it was less than 2 weeks ago that Assad fell. Well, maybe 2 weeks ago today. And what are they finding in just 2 weeks? There are prisons. It was days they've been digging through prisons trying to get the people in the lower levels that had been put down there and kept. And Assad lived in a palace and took 2 billion with him. That Tucker, that Dr. Sachs, that's why you don't like Assad. And stop with this nonsense that it's a psyop, that he wasn't like that. He was like this, and everybody who was a thinking person for the last 52 years knew this about the Assad regime. And nobody will talk about it. But we'll call Bibi Netanyahu worse than the guy who did the Holocaust, or as bad. It really upsets me. And people need to be discerning. And Jesus said the characteristic of the last days would be deception. Pay attention. Figure out what's going on. And my fear is it gets worse from here. We're just scratching the surface. So anyway, go listen to this interview of this gentleman about his uncle. It's heartbreaking. So let's pray. By the way, Merry Christmas. Tough times, and you need to prepare your heart and mind that you're going to see more of this. So let's pray. Lord, we're so grateful that you gave us warnings that echo more, resonate more than they ever have. And Lord, I just pray that you will help all of us to have the discernment to dig through this deception that's coming at us from many different angles. Help us to guard our hearts. And in the meantime, motivate us, and fill us with your Holy Spirit to go out and boldly share the gospel with those around us. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.